Christmas parties are supposed to come with hot chocolate, ugly sweaters, and mild family judgment. Not a legal notice telling you your father secretly sold your house to pay off your sister's latest disaster. One minute I was sipping wine, the next I was reading a document that basically said, "Merry Christmas, you're homeless." And the best part, everyone else knew. Everyone except me. But here's the thing, they thought I'd cry. Stayed, I smiled because they had no idea what I'd already planned. If you're interested in this topic, hit the like button, subscribe, and type interested in the comments and I will give you a heart. Christmas has a very specific smell in my parents' house. Cinnamon, regret, and the faint aftershocks of terrible decisions made over decades. So when I walked through the door that night, balancing a bottle of wine and the emotional stamina it takes to interact with my family, I already felt that weird pre-holiday tension. You know that feeling where everyone is smiling a little too hard, laughing a little too loudly, pretending a little too intensely? A perfect setup for disaster. I stepped inside, kicked the snow off my boots, and there she was. My sister Holly. Yes, Holly. My parents really leaned into the theme. She saw me and smirked in that perfect combination of superiority and gratitude. Superiority because she believed she was the princess of this family, and gratitude because she knew, deep down, she could only stay that way if someone else absorbed the consequences of her decisions. The person who was telling you all of that, bully, that's someone who usually may. You made it, she said, air kissing my cheek as if she were auditioning for a reality show. We didn't think you'd come. Translation, we hoped you wouldn't come because we're hiding something and your presence complicates the script. I hung my coat and smiled back. Why would I miss it? It's Christmas. And I wanted to see what version of chaos you'd bring this year. She rolled her eyes. Please, I'm being responsible now. Responsible? That word was already doing a lot of heavy lifting. Holly's version of responsible meant she hadn't crashed a rental car this month. It meant she'd paid one bill on time and wanted applause. It meant that somewhere in this house, something enormous and stupid was waiting to explode. I followed the noise into the living room where the family had gathered around the tree. My father stood in the center, chest puffed, wearing a sweater so aggressively red, it looked like it was trying to compensate for something. He opened his arms dramatically. There she is, the backbone of the family. And there it was, the first warning sign. When a narcissist compliments you in public, it's usually to set up a private betrayal. My mother shuffled over with a plate of cookies, eyes darting nervously. Eat something, she whispered. You look tired. Another warning sign. My mother only gets whispery when she's hiding something big enough to ruin a holiday. I took a cookie, bit into it, and pretended not to notice the tension vibrating under every smile. Then came dinner, loud, chaotic, filled with the usual blend of unsolicited opinions and emotional landmines. Holly dominated the conversation with a dramatic retelling of how stressed she'd been lately. People don't understand how hard it is to rebuild your life, she said, placing her hand on her chest with Oscar-worthy finesse. Debt collectors calling nonstop, court threats. I've been through so much. I sipped my wine. That's what happens when you don't pay people what you owe? She blinked, stunned that I dared introduce reality into her fantasy. My parents glared at me like I'd kicked a puppy. Now's not the time for judgment, Dad said, waving his fork. She's had a hard year. So have a lot of people, I replied. But most don't create their own emergencies. The table fell silent for a moment. Then, as always, the conversation shifted to safer topics. But I noticed how my mother kept fidgeting, how Dad avoided looking at me directly, how Holly smiled with the confidence of someone who had absolutely gotten away with something. By dessert, something in the room felt wrong, off, electric, like everyone was holding a secret except me. And as fate would have it, I didn't discover the truth in some dramatic, cinematic confrontation. No, my downfall arrived through a whisper, a literal whisper. While grabbing more wine from the hallway table, I heard my parents in the kitchen speaking in hushed, panicked tones. Does she know? My mother asked. My father scoffed. Of course she doesn't know. Do you see her asking questions? She's clueless. She'll be fine. She won't be fine, Mom said. It was her house. My grip tightened on the glass, but I didn't move. We had no choice, Dad whispered harshly. Holly owed too much. They were going to garnish wages, sue, repossessed. The only way to pay it was to sell something valuable. My heart thudded. Please, God, not what I think. Selling her house was the only solution. The world tilted. The hallway spun. My ears rang. They sold my house, my home, my inheritance, my stability, my grandmother's last gift behind my back. For Holly, for the family screw up, for the one person who treated responsibility like an optional hobby. I set the wine glass down before it shattered in my hand. She'll understand, Dad said confidently. She always does. And that sentence, those 3 words, were the spark that lit the fuse. Always does, always sacrifices, always bends, always takes the hit, always absorbs the damage meant for someone else. Not anymore. I walked back into the living room slowly, deliberately, feeling something inside me harden to resolve. I wasn't the clueless daughter anymore. I wasn't the safety net. I wasn't the backup plan. And as I looked around the room, noticing the fake smiles, the practiced innocence, the staged warmth, I realized something. This family had no idea that the version of me they betrayed wasn't the version standing here now. They didn't know what I discovered. They didn't know what I was capable of. They didn't know the storm they just unleashed. And the best part, they were about to find out. The funny thing about knowing a secret no one thinks you know is that suddenly everything looks different. People's smiles look rehearsed, their voices sound too smooth, their movements seem calculated, rehearsed, almost staged, like they're actors reading lines from a script written by a committee of delusional people. And that's exactly how my family looked as I stepped back into the living room, like a cast performing a play titled, "We Hope She Doesn't Find Out," but I had found out. And instead of exploding like the version of me they remembered, I did something far more alarming to them. I stayed calm. Calm is terrifying when you're guilty. Calm means you have a plan. Calm means something is coming. Calm means your enemies should start sweating. I watched them from across the room. My father had resumed his favorite holiday activity, telling exaggerated stories about himself to relatives who'd heard them 100 times. My mother kept moving plates around like rearranging cookies would rearrange her conscience. And Holly floated around the house, acting like the debt-free princess she apparently believed she was now, blissfully unaware that her entire fresh start had been built on the foreclosure notice stapled to my future. She walked up to me with a smug smile that made my teeth itch. "So," she said, sipping her wine, "are you seeing anyone yet? Or are you still married to that job of yours? This is why I don't bring people to family events. Because if I did, she'd ask them questions like, do you make more than her? Or are you also boring? Or is this a solo trait?" I gave her a polite smile, the kind that felt like stretching barbed wire across my face. "No one's serious," I answered. "But I'm picky. I like stable people." She froze for half a second, realizing that I had just referred to her as the opposite of that. "Wow," she said with a laugh so fake it should have been wrapped in plastic. "You're feeling spicy tonight." If only she knew. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from my coworker Jenna. "Merry Christmas. Did your dad like the watch you got him?" I stared at the message. The watch. Oh, the irony. The beautiful, painful irony. I'd picked it out weeks ago, imagining the joy on his face. The kind of joy he used to show me when I was younger, before he started showing it only to Holly. I texted back, "I haven't given it yet." She replied immediately, "Film it. I want to see him cry." If he cried tonight, it wouldn't be for the reason she imagined. I put my phone away and walked into the kitchen where Mom was stress organizing forks. "You okay?" she whispered, like she knew the answer and feared it. "I'm fine," I said, and for once, the lie wasn't for me, it was for her. She looked at my face and knew that wasn't true, but instead of asking questions, she did what she always did, avoided them. "Your father, he didn't mean..." "Mom," I said softly, "please don't." She nodded, defeated, because she knew the truth. He did mean it. He'd meant every part of it. He had thought through each decision, each signature, each lie, and he had decided that my life was the easiest one to put on the chopping block because I wouldn't fight back. But as I stared at my mother, I realized something that shifted the entire balance of the night. She was scared too. Not scared of me, scared of what he had done, scared of it blowing up, scared of the consequences, racing toward them like a train they refused to see. He shouldn't have done it, she whispered, voice cracking, but he felt like he had no choice. Your sister, I cut her off. My sister made choices, and he fixed her consequences by creating mine. Her eyes filled with tears, she tried to blink away. I tried to talk him out of it, but you didn't stop him, I said gently. And that was the truth she didn't want to swallow. Her silence had been permission, her guilt was earned. I walked back into the living room, and that's when I saw it. Holly on the couch with my father, leaning her head on his shoulder like a toddler, whining about how life is just so unfair sometimes, and my father nodding sympathetically, offering comfort he never once offered me. Only watching them, I felt something inside me shift. Not anger, not betrayal, something colder, something like clarity. Because in that moment, I finally accepted a truth I had been resisting for years. I had never been the daughter. I had been the insurance policy, the reliable one, the safety net, the one whose accomplishments were expected and therefore ignored, the one whose sacrifices were invisible because they were constant, and the one they believed would always be there to clean up the wreckage of their favorite child's fireworks. They didn't just sell my house, they sold the illusion that we were a family. Suddenly the room felt too small, too warm, too dishonest. I stepped outside onto the back porch, letting the cold air slap my thoughts into something sharper. Frost covered the wooden railing. Christmas lights blinked lazily, and for the first time all evening I could breathe. Behind me, the door slid open. I didn't turn around. I didn't need to. I knew who it was from the nervous exhale. Dad. You walked away in the middle of dessert, he said. Rude. I let the silence stretch until he shifted uncomfortably. We need to talk about this, he added. I finally turned. Yes, I said softly, we do. He straightened his shoulders, prepared to justify himself. Look, I know you're upset, but your sister is not my responsibility, I finished. He frowned. Family helps family. Family doesn't forge signatures, I replied. His jaw tightened. You misunderstood, I read the paperwork. That shut him up. Completely. You weren't supposed to see that, he said. No, I replied. I wasn't supposed to know. That's not the same thing. He opened his mouth and closed it again, caught between defending himself and realizing he couldn't. It was for your sister, he finally said. She needed it more. You mean she needed more than I deserved my own home? He ran a hand through his hair. You're stronger. You'll recover. She won't. Why is her weakness my responsibility? He had no answer for that. None he could say out loud. So I stepped closer, lowering my voice. Dad, what you did isn't something you walk away from. You don't get to act like this was a tiny mistake. You committed fraud. You sold something that wasn't yours. You gambled with my future and didn't even bother to tell me. His face flushed. You wouldn't have agreed. Exactly, I said. That's why you didn't ask. His expression shifted then. Panic, realization, fear. Good. Let him feel everything, because for the first time he was forced to confront something he had never believed possible. I wasn't going to protect him. Not anymore. He opened his mouth again, but before he could speak, the sliding door opened and Holly stepped out. Arms crossed, face scrunched in offended confusion. What's going on out here? She demanded, as if she owned the porch, the house, the whole damn planet. I turned to her slowly. Since you're here, I said calmly, you might as well hear this too. And the look on her face told me she had no idea the world she lived in was about to crack down the middle as something much bigger and much darker shifted into place. Holly stepped onto the porch like she was entering a courtroom. She assumed she'd already won. She folded her arms, twisted her mouth into that familiar annoyed pout. her signature blend of entitlement and selective innocence, and looked between me and Dad like we were inconveniencing her personal Christmas movie moment. Dad tried to recover before she caught on, puffing himself up like he was the reasonable one, but there was a flicker of panic in his eyes he couldn't hide, and Holly immediately clocked it. "Why are you guys being weird?" she demanded, her voice sharp with suspicion, not because she sensed guilt, but because attention wasn't on her for 3 consecutive minutes, and that, to her, was a crisis. I looked at her slowly, deliberately, letting the weight of what I knew settle between us like fresh snow, soft on the surface, cold and dangerous underneath. "We're not being weird," I said calmly. "We're just discussing something Dad forgot to mention." Holly blinked, confused for a second, then glanced at Dad for reassurance, the way a toddler might look at a parent before touching a stove. Dad's jaw flexed, his eyes darted. His silence said, "Everything." "What's going on?" Holly repeated, but the annoyance in her voice had started to slip into uncertainty, the kind that makes someone realize they might be the problem, or worse, that they might be caught. I stepped closer, my tone soft but edged and still. "It's about the house." That single word, house, made her posture change. Her chin lifted, her shoulders straightened. Suddenly, the bratty princess melted in the insecure adult surface, the one who feared consequences but always expected someone else to absorb them. "The house?" she echoed. "What about it?" I held her gaze with a level of calm that made Dad shift nervously. "Dad didn't tell you the whole story." She blinked again. "What story?" "The one about how he paid off your debt." Her throat bobbed. Dad muttered something under his breath, something panicked and useless. I ignored him. "You know, the debt collectors, the lawsuit threats, the credit mess. You remember those, right?" Holly's eyes widened a fraction. I know I had issues, okay, but Dad said a lot of things." I cut in, voice still controlled. "But what he didn't say is how he paid it all." Her breath hitched. "You're making it sound like something bad." "Bad?" I repeated with a humorless smile. "Try catastrophic." Dad finally snapped, his voice low and defensive. "Stop exaggerating. It's not catastrophic unless you make it catastrophic." I turned to him slowly in the cold porch light. "You sold my house." Holly gasped. Dad winced. In the look on Holly's face in that moment, shock mixed with a sprinkle of disbelief told me everything I needed to know. She had no idea, which was somehow both a relief and an insult. "Wait, what?" she stammered. "Sold? Her house? Dad, what does she mean, sold?" Dad raised his hands like he was calming children. "It's complicated. It's fraud," I corrected. Holly's gaze snapped between us in frantic confusion. "Fraud? What fraud? Dad?" He exhaled sharply, his voice rising. "It wasn't fraud. It was necessary." I tilted my head. "So forging my signature was necessary?" Holly's jaw dropped. "Forged?" Dad tried to backpedal. "You don't understand." "No," I said calmly. "She doesn't, because you didn't tell her. You didn't tell me. You didn't tell anyone except Mom, and even she didn't know about the signature." Holly's face drained of color as the pieces clicked together in her mind. "Wait, you mean the house, your house, was used because of me?" Her voice cracked at the end. Not out of guilt, out of fear. Fear of what this meant for her. Fear of losing the safety net she'd never appreciated. Fear of consequences finally circling her like wolves. "Dad?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "Tell me she's lying." He didn't answer, and that silence, heavy, clumsy, and choking, was a confirmation she didn't want. Holly stepped back, her eyes filling with tears. "Why would you do that? Why would you use your house? Why not anything else?" Dad exploded defensively. "Because she is responsible. She can handle it. You..." He stopped too late because the truth slipped out raw and ugly. "You can't." Holly stared at him like he'd slapped her. And maybe emotionally he had. That was the first time she'd ever heard him say it aloud. The first time she'd ever realized the pedestal she lived on wasn't admiration. It was dependency. He needed her to stay fragile so he could stay the hero. I stepped closer, lowering my voice to a razor's whisper. You were never the problem, Holly. You were the symptom, he was the disease. She looked wrecked, shaken, disoriented. I didn't ask him to do that, she whispered. I didn't tell him to sell your house. No, I said, but you didn't ask where the money came from either. Convenient ignorance is still ignorance. Holly's face crumpled, and for the first time in her life, I saw something genuine. Fear. Not fear of me, fear of losing the fantasy she'd lived in. I turned to Dad. This wasn't a mistake. It was a decision. You didn't sacrifice for the family. You sacrificed the family for one person. He straightened, voice hardened by pride and denial. I did what I had to do. No, I replied softly. You did what you thought you could get away with. Holly looked at him with wide, horrified eyes. Dad, tell her it's not true. Tell her you didn't really... He broke. But it wasn't supposed to matter. She always lands on her feet. And that sentence, those 7 careless, callous words, were the final confirmation I needed. Holly covered her mouth like she'd been punched. Mom appeared behind the sliding door, face pale, eyes glistening. She'd heard it too. Dad realized what he'd said. His face collapsed with the weight of a truth he never meant to say out loud. I stepped toward him one last time. You didn't just sell my house, I said. You sold the one thing a parent never should, trust. And the silence that followed wasn't shock, it was burial of his authority, his excuses, his image. Holly whispered, What? What happens now? I looked at her, at Mom, at him, and the calmness inside me crystallized into something precise and irreversible. Now, I whispered. Now, the consequences begin. And as the 3 of them stood there, stunned and terrified, the doorbell rang inside the house, announcing the arrival of someone who would shift everything even further into chaos. The doorbell ringing in the middle of emotional carnage felt almost scripted, like the universe itself wanted to see how much chaos one family could endure before combusting. The 3 of them, Dad pale, Mom trembling in the doorway, and Holly halfway between denial and meltdown, froze as the chime echoed through the house. I didn't move at first. I just watched them absorb the second shockwave of the night, each of them silently praying the sound wasn't another consequence arriving with a bow. Dad composed himself first, straightening the front of his sweater in a desperate attempt to look like a man who had everything under control. Newsflash, he didn't. Stay here, he ordered us, the command brittle and laughable, as if he still believed he had authority. He walked inside. The moment he disappeared, Holly's facade cracked. Her voice shook. Do you think it's the bank? She whispered, like the word bank itself might summon a demon. Probably not, I said calmly, even though it would have been poetic. Banks don't make house calls on holidays. Her shoulders dropped in relief for a millisecond, then tense again when I added, but lawyers do. Mom covered her mouth to stifle a gasp, eyes widening with dread. She looked like someone watching a house of cards collapsing in slow motion, knowing she helped build it. The doorbell rang again, this time louder, more impatient, more official. Dad's muffled voice came from the foyer, growing louder, strained, defensive. Then another man's voice, calm, controlled, professional. My father's kryptonite. I walked toward the sliding door to listen, ignoring Mom's desperate whisper of my name. The porch lights flickered behind me as I leaned closer, catching fragments of the conversation. Dad saying, "This is a private gathering." The visitor responding, "This can't wait." Dad insisting, "It's Christmas." The man replying, "The law doesn't observe holidays." That line alone made me smile, just slightly. I stepped into the house, and the second I appeared in the hallway, Dad's face dropped. Not in anger, in panic, pure, unfiltered panic. The man at the door turned to look at me, a well-dressed, middle-aged professional with a briefcase and the calm demeanor of someone who delivers bad news for a living. "Miss Harper?" he asked me. "Yes," I said. Dad sputtered. "You don't need to speak with her." The man blinked. She is the homeowner. Legally, she does. Dad visibly shrank. It was the first time all night someone reminded him he wasn't the protagonist of reality. "Please, may I come in?" the man asked me. Dad started to object again, but I stepped forward and opened the door wider. "Please do," I said. Holly appeared behind me, mascara smudged, face pale, and Mom hovered like she wanted to shield everyone from the truth, even though the truth was already in the house, swallowing the walls. The man stepped inside, dusting snowflakes off his gray coat. "My name is Mr. Kellerman," he said, offering me a professional nod. "I'm here on behalf of the lending institution handling the Harper property loan." Dad flinched. Holly whimpered. Mom whispered, "Dear God." I kept my expression cool. "And what brings you here tonight?" Mr. Kellerman clasped his briefcase. "It has come to our attention that several documents related to the loan were flagged during an internal audit." He opened the case and pulled out a stack of papers. My papers, my signature, my house, my life. "We required direct confirmation from the homeowner regarding the authenticity of her signature," he continued. "Given the potential discrepancy, we are legally obligated to verify before proceeding." Dad tried to interrupt. "It's all legitimate. We signed." "You are not the homeowner," the man said without even looking at him. Dad shut his mouth hard. Mr. Kellerman turned to me. "Ms. Harper, we attempted to contact you by mail last week. The notice was returned." I slowly looked at Dad. He looked away. Of course, the notice never reached me. Of course, he intercepted it. "I understand there may be confusion," Mr. Kellerman said. "So to simplify, I need only one question answered tonight." He held up the contract. "Is this your signature?" The room felt suspended, like even the Christmas lights stopped blinking to watch. Holly was breathing shallowly behind me. Mom clasped her hand so tightly her knuckles went white. Dad looked like a man pleading telepathically for me to save him, and that's what made the moment so powerful. He wasn't worried about me. He wasn't worried about my house. He wasn't worried about the fraud. He was worried about himself, about the fallout, the embarrassment, the public exposure. So I looked at the forged signature for exactly 1 second, then raised my eyes and said the clearest, calmest word I've ever spoken: "No." Every breath in the room hitched. Holly gasped out loud. Mom whispered, "Oh no." Dad's face drained instantly, like I had unplugged electricity from his body. Mr. Kellerman nodded professionally. "Thank you, that is all we needed for verification. We will take the appropriate next steps." Dad lunged forward. No, wait. She doesn't understand. We can fix this." "Sir," Mr. Kellerman said, "you cannot fix fraud with more fraud." That sentence slapped the entire room. Holly began crying, not cute crying, but panicked, ugly sobbing. The kind that comes from realizing the safety net has a hole the size of reality. What happens now?" She choked. Mr. Kellerman turned to her sympathetically. "That depends on the lender's decision. The loan may be void, charges may be filed, a full investigation will be required." Dad staggered back like he'd been physically punched. "She's my daughter," he croaked. "I was trying to help her." "By breaking the law?" The man replied. Dad looked at me, then no anger, no bluster, just fear so raw it barely looked human. "Please," he whispered, "please don't let this happen." And for the first time in my life, I felt nothing for his fear. No pity, no instinct to protect him, no sense of obligation, just clarity. Cold, sharp clarity. I turned to Mr. Kellerman and nodded. "Please process everything exactly as required by law." Dad collapsed into a chair. Holly cried harder. Mom clutched her chest. And as the man gathered his papers and prepared to leave, the house, our house, this entire warped family universe, felt like it had just tilted irreversibly. But the real turning point wasn't the legal blow. It was what happened after he walked out the door and my father realized something far more devastating than fraud was unfolding. He was no longer in control of me. He had lost the daughter he thought he owned. And the silence that followed wasn't just awkward. It was the beginning of his entire world unraveling in ways he never saw coming. The silence after Mr. Kellerman left wasn't normal silence. It was the heavy, suffocating kind that sits between people who have finally run out of excuses. The door clicked shut, and it was like every light in the room dimmed, leaving only the cold reality hovering between us. Dad sat hunched in the armchair like a man who had lived his whole life expecting immunity and suddenly discovered he could bleed. Mom stood near the door, fingers trembling against her mouth, her holiday apron askew like she just survived a disaster no one warned her about. And Holly? Holly had sunk onto the couch, sobbing into her hands, mascara streaking down her cheeks in dark rivers that matched the collapse of the fantasy she'd been clinging to her entire life. But me? I stood there steady, centered, controlled in a way that made the room tilt. For once, I wasn't the one falling apart. I wasn't the one scrambling to fix something. I wasn't the firefighter of the family sprinting toward flames I never started. I was the witness, the judge, the consequence they never saw coming. Dad lifted his head slowly, eyes red and wet, not from guilt, but from pure fear. "You didn't have to say no," he whispered. "You could have told him it was a misunderstanding." "It wasn't," I said calmly. "You forged my name." "To help your sister," he shot back, as if repeating the justification would somehow erase reality. "To save her future, her life would have been over." "And mine?" I asked. "Yours?" He blinked, confused. "You would have been fine." There it was again. His core belief, his excuse for everything. I was indestructible. I was limitless. I was the emotional pack mule built to carry every burden this family tossed on me. He leaned forward desperately. "You strong enough to handle setbacks." "She isn't, so you created one for me?" His face contorted in shame and frustration. "I didn't think you'd make this a big deal." A laugh escaped my mouth, sharp, disbelieving, edged with something colder than anger. "You didn't think losing my home was a big deal?" "It wasn't losing it," he said weakly. "It was helping your sister until she could stand on her feet." I stared at him, trying to decide whether he truly didn't understand or whether denial had become his personality. "Dad," I said slowly, "you didn't just sign paperwork. You committed fraud. You involved a bank. You put my name on a loan I didn't authorize. You put my house at risk. You lied to me. You hid notices from me, and you did it because you assumed my life was yours to gamble with." He looked down, unable to hold my gaze. Holly wiped her eyes and whispered, "I didn't know." I turned to her. "I believe you, but not knowing doesn't make you innocent. It makes you irresponsible." She sniffled, her voice shaking. "I didn't ask him to do it. I didn't ask him to steal from you." "No," I said. "But you didn't care where the money came from as long as it came." Her face crumpled. She knew it was true. She knew she'd spent her life taking and expecting more, assuming someone else, usually me, would pay the price. "What do we do now?" Mom whispered. The quiet terror in her voice finally made me soften, not from pity, but from closure. Because that question, "What do we do now?" was the question of someone who realized the old system was gone. The system where Dad bent rules to protect Holly, where Mom smoothed over consequences, where I quietly held the entire structure upright. Now it was broken, and none of them knew how to function inside the ruins. I walked toward the fireplace, looking at the family photos on the mantle. My childhood smile frozen beside a girl who hadn't yet learned her value was conditional. I spoke without turning back, like, "You're all waiting to hear whether I'm going to fix this for you." No one responded. Silence was confirmation. "I'm not," I said. Holly gasped softly, as if she still believed I should save her from her own downfall. "I'm not paying the loan," I continue. "I'm not rescuing the house you put at risk. I'm not absorbing the consequences of choices I didn't make." Dad stood slowly, wobbling like a man who'd forgotten how to bow. "You're gonna let them investigate me?" "I'm not letting anything happen," I said. "I'm stepping out of the way. The consequences will do the rest." He stumbled forward, reaching out like he wanted to grab my arm, like he could hold onto the old dynamic by force. "I am your father," he said, voice cracking. "I did everything for this family." I turned around with a calmness that rattled him. You did everything for Holly. Everything you ever did to me was to make me more useful to Holly. Mom's tears finally spilled. Dad shook his head. I didn't mean for it to go this far, but it did. Holly whimpered, hugging herself. Please don't let them take the house, she cried. Please don't let this ruin everything. Everything was already ruined. The moment Dad decided my stability was optional, I answered softly. Dad's voice rose into a desperate crescendo. You can fix this. You can tell them it was a mistake. You can tell them you signed it. I won't lie for you. His mouth opened and closed. He had no script for this moment. He had never once imagined a world where I wasn't the obedient daughter who patched the holes he punched into the walls of this family. So, that's it? He asked, defeated. You're just gonna let us fall apart? No, I said gently. I'm gonna let you face the truth. I grabbed my coat, slipped it on, and walked toward the door. Their fear trailed behind me like shadows trying to cling to the light. Holly sobbed. Mom whispered my name like a prayer. Dad whispered it like a plea, and as my hand closed around the doorknob, I paused. Not out of doubt, but out of closure. You sold my house to save her, I said quietly. But what you really did was show me who I am in this family and who I'm not. I stepped outside into the cold, crisp night air. The snow glowed under the streetlights, and behind me, inside that house, the old version of me was dying quietly. The betrayal wasn't the end, it was the awakening. And what came next wasn't revenge, it was justice. A kind they'd never seen from me before. And as I walked down the icy driveway, hearing the muffled sound of my family unraveling behind me, I realized something both terrifying and liberating at once. This was just the beginning. Snow crunched under my boots as I walked away from the house. The same house where I'd learned to tiptoe around tempers, absorb blame like a sponge, and apologize for storms I didn't create. But tonight, something inside me snapped into its final shape. It wasn't rage anymore. It was clarity, the kind that settles into your bones when you choose yourself over a legacy built on uneven floors. By the time I reached the street, my phone buzzed again. Another voicemail from Dad, the 8th one. I didn't listen, not yet. I wasn't ready to hear him beg or bargain or twist the truth into little origami shapes that made him feel innocent. Let them sit in the consequences for once. Let them taste the discomfort they'd always fed to me. I headed toward the corner store, the only place open on Christmas Eve besides misery and bad decisions. The warmth inside fogged my glasses instantly. The cashier, a college kid with candy cane earrings, smiled at me. Rough night? She asked gently. You have no idea, I replied, grabbing a hot chocolate like it was a life raft. While I paid, my phone buzzed again, but this time it wasn't a family member. It was a number I hadn't seen in over a year. Unknown local. My stomach tightened. I stepped outside, letting the cold slap me awake, and answered. Hello? A familiar voice came through, steady, warm, the kind that could anchor a ship. It's Evan, he said. The real estate attorney who had handled the paperwork when I bought my house. Evan, the one who warned me months ago that something seemed off with my mortgage notification. Evan, the man whose instincts I ignored because I trusted my family more than my own eyes. I heard what happened, he said. The investigator reached out to me. They wanted background on your purchase documents. My breath puffed in front of me like steam from a train engine. It's true, I said quietly. They forged my signature, my father. He sold my house. Evan didn't gasp or stumble or dramatize like everyone else. He said something far more powerful. I'm sorry, but I'm also glad you finally know the truth. The words hit me harder than anything Dad said that night because Evan was right. Truth hurts, but it frees. Where are you? He asked. Outside, Walker's Market. Stay there. I'm coming. Don't walk alone tonight. And the thing is, I didn't want to. For the first time in hours, the isolation cracked enough for warmth to seep through. 15 minutes later, his silver SUV pulled up and he stepped out wearing a coat dusted with snow. He looked at me like he already knew the entire story without needing to hear a word. "Get in," he said softly. I did. The heater blasted warm air onto my frozen fingers. For a moment, we just sat there, the quiet settling between us like a safe blanket. Then he spoke. "You know this wasn't just betrayal," he said. "What your father did is criminal. And he didn't just jeopardize your home. He jeopardized your credit, your financial identity, your entire future." "I know," I whispered, staring at the dashboard. "So what now?" He turned toward me, his voice steady. "Now we take back everything they tried to take from you, legally, cleanly, without anger clouding your judgment." The idea felt too big, too heavy, too loud. "That would destroy them," I said. "They already destroyed themselves," he replied. "You're not doing anything to them. You're simply choosing not to carry their consequences anymore." I closed my eyes, letting the truth sink in. For years, I was the fixer, the glue, the bridge, the emotional janitor sweeping up broken pieces they kept smashing. But what happens when the janitor stops cleaning? The mess becomes visible. The people responsible have to face the debris. Evan drove me to his office, not to work, but because he didn't want me going back to an empty apartment, emotionally spiraling. He made tea, handed me a blanket, and let me sit while he reviewed the investigation notes. And then he looked up with something I hadn't expected to hear. "There's a loophole," he said. "A big one." My heart thudded. "What kind?" He rotated his laptop toward me. "Your father not only forged your signature, he used a power of attorney document that expired 5 years ago. It's invalid. Everything he signed using it is void." My jaw dropped. "So, the house? Legally yours, ironclad." My breath caught. "And the loan? Not your responsibility because you never agreed to it." I stared at the screen, disbelief washing over me like a tidal wave. "My father's going to lose everything," I said quietly. "He already has," Evan replied. "He lost you." That hit harder than I expected. Deep, painful truth. I spent years craving their approval, their praise, their acknowledgement, but tonight they handed me something better: freedom. The next morning, the investigator called. The forgery was confirmed. Legal proceedings were beginning. Dad sent 21 texts. Holly sent 10. Mom left 7 voicemails. I didn't respond to any of them. Instead, I packed a small bag and went to my house, the house that was still undeniably legally mine. The key turned smoothly in the lock. The warmth inside greeted me, peaceful and undisturbed. And standing there in the entryway, I felt something I had never felt in that home before. Ownership, not just of the house, but of myself. Later that evening, as I stood by the window watching snow drift onto the driveway, my phone buzzed again. One message from Dad. I opened it. "Please come home, we need to talk." I typed back slowly, deliberately, every word carved from clarity instead of anger. "Home isn't where you betrayed me. Home is where I rebuilt myself." I hit send, and just like that, the cycle broke. That night, I lit a candle, made dinner for one, and sat in silence that wasn't lonely. It was peaceful, empowering, mine. You'd think that would be the end of the story, but betrayal has a strange way of circling back, not to reopen wounds, but to highlight how far you've come. Because sometimes the real inheritance isn't money or property, it's the strength you gain from surviving the people who try to break you.